Today's AP Art History lesson, lecture, flipped classroom, however you want to look at it, is of ancient China. So welcome, and let's get started.
So one of the ways that I have my AP World History kids, and I know this is a video for AP Art History, but one of the ways that I have students kind of remember the dynasties of the Chinese culture is that they sing a little song called the Chinese Dynasty Song. Now, if you've been in AP World History, you might have had a teacher who's a bit like me and uses this song to refer Jaka. So this is the way it goes. It goes Sheng Zhou Qian Han, Sheng Zhou Qian Han, Sui Tang Song, Sui Tang Song, Yaming Qing Republic, Yaming Qing Republic, Mao Zedong, Mao Zedong. Now, this is a pretty easy tune to do, and what I have my students remember is that as they sing the song, they should have in their memory banks a little bit about that time period. So when you do art history, in particular using the song, is like, what art can you remember from the Shang Dynasty, or from the Zhou Dynasty, or the Han Dynasty, or the Qin Dynasty? And so as you sing the song, think of you should have at least, in the early stuff, you're going to come up with about one piece of art, maybe two. If I'm singing this song and I get to the Qin Dynasty, obviously I'm thinking of Shui Hongdi, and I'm thinking of the terracotta warriors that were part of his burial mausoleum. So the song kind of helps you kind of have these trigger points to art. All right. So sing the song, practice the song, but continue on with the video as we're getting into the Neolithic art period. We're going to be talking about some ceramic ware as well as Jade Kong, and then we're going to get into the song, and we're going to be covering in this video the Shang, the Zhou, Qin, and Han art periods. China has a pretty unique history in that it distinguishes itself and as an uninterrupted development, one thing after another, that can track back about 8,000 years. From the Qin Dynasty comes the name of the country of China, and the Chinese call this time period the Middle Kingdom, the country in the center of the world. The historical and cultural heart of China is the land and how it was fed by three great rivers. China is one of the five great civilizations that all developed along waterways. So we have the Yellow River, we have the Yangtze River, and the Qi River. Then you have the geography of China that's separated north and south by the Qingling Mountains, dividing that inner China from north and south. And that kind of really creates two very different climates. And because of these different climates, just like we would see in Greece, you see different cultures, you see different historical fates. You could look into the south at the Yangtze River and how it flows through green hills and fertile delta plains, along with the southern coastlines, which were rich with natural harbors. And so you had port cities developing. And then you have the Yellow River, which is named China Sorrow because of its disastrous flood systems that would wipe out entire cities that were built along the ways, as well as the winds that come whipping down from the north. Yet over its vast frontiers have come the nomadic invaders as well. We're talking about the Mongols, they are the exception, and the Manchus, and later on Europeans that during the age of imperialism. And with all this would carve China's history, being visited by caravans and emissaries over their 1,000 years of history. Early evidence of our Neolithic cultures, and this is where we really begin our discussion, have led historians to believe that agriculture was sort of the keystone to China's history, that it made China. And some of this technology, these ideas may have come from the Near East, and then again, it may not have. We're not really sure because we don't have that written information. For China, agriculture was based on rice in the south and millet in the north, and they arose independently. And one of the clearest archaeological signs of China's early Neolithic culture is evidenced by its vigorous emergence of towns and cities, again, along waterways. And you would have cities like Jiangxi near the modern Jian dynasty, one of our very early dynasties, and the foundations of more than 100 dwellings have been discovered in the past 100 years. And around these surroundings, we have found communal centers, we found cemeteries, and what's most important is a kiln. Now, that kiln is very important. First of all, you have to understand kilns back in ancient Neolithic times, there were no thermometers. Everything was all just testing. And so in China and in other places, this is way before the potter's wheel was created. Neolithic pottery, it has been identified not only just in Chinese culture, but also in places like the Indus River Valley. And they're interesting objects. And what we have in the upper right-hand corner is a pretty shallow red bowl. And it has a nice little turned out rim. And this was found in the Banpo area near the Yellow River. The bowl is an artifact of the Yangshou culture. And art historians refer to this as painted pottery. Cultures of the Neolithic China. And although there hasn't been a potter's wheel, if you really take a good close look, this bowl is perfectly round, which tells you that they had a great eye for detail. It is highly polished, and it is showing a distinctly advanced technology for a Neolithic culture. And then inside, if you look, there are decorations. There are markings that may be evidence to the earliest forms of writing in China, which was developed by the time the first definitive examples appear during the second millennium BCE, during China's Bronze Age. If you look inside that bowl, you'll see stylized fish, which might suggest that fishing might have been an activity. Maybe this bowl was for fish to sit in. We don't know. It has a utilitarian effect here. The images between the two fish represent human faces that are being flanked by the fish. And although, again, because we don't have writing to tell us what it's all about, we have to make up these interpretations of the image. And it may be a depiction of ancestral figures, because we know that in early China, ancestor worship was a very important element. Nature spirits, like what we would find in Japan during Shintoism. Nature spirits was a fundamental element of early Chinese beliefs. So let's talk about the Liangzhou culture. We're talking about Banpo, where we found this bowl, and Banpo lies near a great bend in the Yellow River, in an area traditionally regarded as sort of Chinese epicenter of birth. Recent digs in the sites more than 800 miles away, near Hangzhou Bay in the southeast coastal region, have uncovered human and animal images that are dating back more than 5,000 years from Liangzhou culture. And what we have here is a jade Kong. Now, typically, if you've been doing your studies, you would know that not only if you have a Kong, you also have a bee that goes with it as well. And in this particular, we see, if you look closely at the images, you see large round eyes, you see a flattened nose, very rectangular mouth protruding slightly from the pattern. The upper face may be human, perhaps riding on top of an animal of some sort. It could be like an early horse. The drawings are of interest. There are 8 masks that were carved in the lower relief. So jade Kong is an object resembling a cylindrical tube encased in a rectangular block. And it bears, if we look at this, we have this really beautiful, smooth finish. It's actually stylized. It has a mask motif. So these Kongs that are found near the remains of persons that were buried, so maybe it was some sort of veneration object, we're not really sure. But the intricacy of the carvings, and there have been hundreds of these found, shows a technical sophistication. And working with jade is not easy. And not only are you carving into the stone, you have to have a very sharp instrument. You also have to get it to this smooth surface. So they would have used sand. Liangzhou artists would have used sand in their hand as the abrasive to slowly grind that stone down. And this was a marvelous refinement of work that was produced at this time. So let's get into the Bronze Age of China. We really begin with the Shang Dynasty. This is our most documented, our earliest documented um, dynasty in Chinese history. So it tells us, and we call this the Bronze Age because we begin to see more bronze works, and we'll talk about those here in a moment. Shang kings ruled, this we'll talk about the historical context here, ruled from a succession at capitals of the Yellow River Valley, where archaeologists have found cities that have walls. And you have to remember, when we look at architecture, we have to ask ourselves, why do you put walls around your city? And that's to keep the bad guys out. We also see, like the Egyptians, vast royal tombs. Society was highly stratified, with ruling groups at the top and then everything kind of working down. But we see bronze technology not only was needed to make weapons, but it was also needed to create ritual vessels. The chief Shang deity, Shangdi, or Di, may have been a sort of great ancestor. Again, remind you the Chinese were ancestor worshippers, and that's what gave birth to their writing because they were doing a great deal of divination. Shang priests communicated with the supernatural world by either using oracle bones, or they would ask a question. This is where writing came from, and they would ask that question. They would write it on a tortoise shell, and they would throw it into heat, and then they would read the cracks. So again, we see with the Shang, ritual bronze. Bronze vessels are the most admired. They are the most studied of the Shang artifacts, like oracle bones and jade objects. They were connected to ritual practices, the sort of ancestor worshiping. And one of the most functional shapes was called the Feng Di. It was a rectangular vessel, as you see down below on the left side of this image, and it stood on four elongated legs, not eggs, but legs, and was used for food offerings. It would feature decorations of raised boss and mask like the Tao Ti. Now, to remind you, Tao Tis were a motif. Originally, meaning has now been lost at this time. And you would have these horizontal registers on the sides and on the legs. Now, understand this: that particular Feng Di was created through piece mold casting. That is, that we are going to do it in separate individual pieces, and then we're going to bring them all together. Also, you have the Guang, which was a ritual pouring vessel, which we have two examples here, the dragon up at the top, and then you have the other vessel down below. And it shows highly sculptural renditions of animal forms. We see that dragon at the top and the pouring spout to cover take the form and the head of the body of an animal, while the rear portion of the vessel covers is conceived in another type of animal. So we have in the front, we have some sort of, it could be a dragon, it could be a tiger, and in the back it's an owl. Overall, it's decorated with geometric designs, and it combines this sort of suggestive zoomorphic form. And such images seem to be related to possibly hunting, the life of the Shang in some way, but there might be a deeper unknown significance. So bronze castworks, these piece molded castings, are for ritual purposes, primarily ancestor worshiping, but they're just beautiful pieces overall. Our next dynasty is the Zhou dynasty. They overtook the Shang, they conquered the Shang, and during this time we see a feudal society develop with nobles related to the kings ruling over numerous small states. Now, the supreme deity for this time is called Tian. So Di has been fired. It's now been replaced by Tian. Tian means heaven. And this is where we kind of get this idea of Chinese dynasty. It's called the Son of Heaven or the Mandate of Heaven. And under the Zhou dynasty and those dynasties that would follow afterward, you came to power because the mandate of heaven has shined on you. So Tian thinks you're worthy of ruling. But if you have famine, if you have invaders, if you have disease, well, obviously you have fallen out of favor with Tian, and you have now lost the mandate of heaven. And so this is going to describe every dynasty all the way up to the Republic of Chinese history. And just like most Chinese dynasties, we would see 300 years of really good, healthy ruling, and then the sort of golden age of the Zhou dynasty in this slow, devolution of Chinese history into the warring states, where you had 10 to 12 states fighting against each other. And what is born against this background of social turmoil is the great philosophy of Confucius and Lao Tzu. And so you would have hundreds of philosophical schools being born at this time. But one of the most beautiful and most elegant Zhou dynasties are these bronze bells, these ritual bronze objects. Again, here's another object, just like the Shang, that's used for ritual purposes. And so this ritual bronze objects continue to play an important role even into the Zhou dynasty, and new forms would develop. So I would compare this to the sort of restlessness of the Greek sculptors. Now, these bells were found in the tomb of the Marquis Yi of the state of Zheng, and each bell is precisely, which is incredible, calibrated to sound two tones. One when struck at the center, and another when struck at the corner. Amazing. And they are arranged in a scale pattern in a variety of registers. Several musicians would have moved, so this isn't a singular instrument, a single player instrument, several, and they would have moved around carillon, striking the bells at the appointed time. So here we have to think that, did music play some sort of role? Well, yes. And so for rituals and for communicating with the supernatural, for the tatui, typically appeared on the front as well as the back of each bell. Beautiful work of art from the Zhou dynasty. And of our early Chinese dynasties, the Qin dynasty, where we do get the name of China from, is probably one of my favorite areas of topic for my world history class. And so during the middle of the 3rd century, we see the Qin dynasty launch a military campaign that would lead to triumph over all the other states. And so now what we have in Chinese history is the first true unification of China. And it's under their first emperor, Shui Hongdi, a man who had power, and he was ruthless, and he was fearful of both assassination and rebellion. And throughout his life, he sought ways to attain immortality. So I'm going to compare his attitude to that of the Egyptian pharaohs. And as soon as he sat down in the throne, boy, he started his own mausoleum, which is today our gorgeous terracotta soldiers. Imagine in 1974 being the peasant who was digging a well and accidentally just pops out ahead of one of these terracotta soldiers. Well, that's how it started. And now we have uncovered, not we, but the Chinese government has uncovered 8,000 life-size terracotta soldiers with 100 life-size ceramic horses standing in military formation, and they're all facing east. They would have been supplied with weapons. They're all ready for battle into the next world. And for more than 2,000 years, the tumultuous history of China unfolded over the top of these buried figures. Each face is individual. The bodies are stylized, don't get me wrong, but each face was sculpted by an actual soldier. In the ongoing excavation of that, additional bronze carriages were found, horses were found, further the evidence of the technology and the artistic naturalism that was happening during Shui Hongdi's reign. The tomb mound itself that's supposed to hold his body has yet to be excavated. And what we find out is that China has a fascination with its antiquity. And only since about the 1920s have historians methodically dug into the layers of Chinese history and the thousands of sites across the country. And one of our greatest fears with Chinese history is looting and products being sold on the black market. Now, the one thing we need to understand about the Qin rule under Shui Hongdi was that Shui Hongdi's rule was harsh. It was repressive. Laws were based on totalitarian philosophy, and this philosophy was known as legalism, and all other philosophers were banned. Historians were executed, history books were burned. Yet the Qin also established the mechanisms of a centralized bureaucracy that would help mold China both politically and culturally into a single entity. Now, Shui Hongdi, we'll leave with this one little bit about the Qin dynasty. When he sat on the throne, he claimed that his dynasty would last for 1,000 years. The reality is that his dynasty lasted for 21 years. 21 years. It was the shortest Chinese dynasty in history. Now it's time to recover. We've come out of the Qin rule of legalism, and then you have the birth of the Han dynasty. And this was led by a commander who overthrew, and he became the founder of the Han dynasty. And during this period, we would see peace, prosperity, stability. Borders extended and became secured. And the Chinese control over strategic stretches of Central Asia, particularly this new trade route, the internet of the time, called the Silk Road trade, which connected Rome to China. In the early Han Dynasty, we would see the twilights of China's so-called mythocentric age, when people believed this close relationship between the supernatural worlds and humans. And here we have this really beautiful silk T-shaped banner that summarizes sort of those early views. This was found in the tomb of an old woman. What we have here is that we have separations. We have registers along the way. So the heavenly realm appears at the top of the crossbar of the T. In the upper right corner is the sun, inhabited by a mythological crow. And in the upper left, we have the mythological toad, stands on a crescent moon. And between them is an image of the torch dragon, a primordial deity, shown as a man with the serpent's tail. Dragons and other celestial creatures sort of like swarm underneath him. You have guards at a gate, these two seated figures right below that register, where the horizontal of the heaven meets the banner's long vertical stem. You have two dragons that are intertwined with each other, and they loop through a circular jade piece known as the bee. Now, I might have mentioned that earlier in the video, where you have a jade Kong, you will always have a bee. Now, the bee is bi, and it in itself usually is a symbol of heaven, dividing the vertical segments into two areas. The portions above the bee represent the first stage of the heavenly realm. We also have the portion beneath the bee represents the earthly world and the world underneath. And this is made of silk, and it's beautiful, and it's stayed in such great shape. And think of all the silkworms that were used to create their fabric. Silk draperies and stone chime hangings from the bee form a canopy in the platform below. Now, an important philosophy is born of this time, and it's called Taoism. And Taoism emphasizes close relationship between humans and natures, and it's concerned with the upbringing of the individual life into harmony, that is, into the way or the Tao of the universe. Taoism, on a popular level, developed into this organized religion. Now, I refer to it as a philosophy, and it does have some mythical aspects to it, so you could kind of play it back and forth. And they would absorb many of the traditions, folk practices, and search for one thing, immortality. Taoists experimented with diet, they experimented with physical exercise and other techniques in the belief of reaching that immortal life. Popular Taoist legends tells of a land of immortals in the Eastern Sea. Takes from this bronze incense burner from the tomb of Prince Li Sheng, who had died roughly around 113 BCE. We have gold inlay outlines the stylized waves of the sea, and above them rise the mountainous island, crowded with birds and animals and the immortals themselves, all cast in their favorite material, bronze, with highlights of inlaid gold. This visionary world would have been shrouded in mist of incense when the burner was being used at the time. Now, a critical philosophy, the contrast to the metaphysical focus of Taoism, is Confucianism. Remind you, we're in the Warring States period and things are chaotic. Confucianism is concerned with the human world. Its goal is to create harmony, and particularly social harmony. It proposed a system of ethics based on reverence for for family, for ancestors, to correct the relationships amongst people because we're in the Warring States period. Confucianism teaches how to kind of solve this problem, this relationship problem within the family, and in an ever widening circle. So we'd start with the family, then it goes to the village, and then it goes to the region, and then to the state. And what you have is a superior and inferior, husband to wife, father to son. And so one is the superior, it shows benevolence, it shows love, and in that the inferior will reciprocate. Emphasis is on social order, respect. That's the big thing for authority. Made Confucianism super attractive to Han rulers, and thus became the official imperial philosophy of the time. And Han philosophers contributed to the process of infusing Confucianism into the cosmology of the Chinese culture. And they emphasize that the Zhou idea, taking up Confucianism, kind of blending it with the mandate of heaven, would become the sort of moral code. You got the mandate of heaven because you were showing Confucianist values. You lost it because you weren't showing Confucianist values. For artists, the expressive quality and structural importance of a brushstroke can be found in calligraphy. Confucius extolled the importance, the criticalness of the pursuit of knowledge in the arts, and among those arts, painting was felt to reflect moral concerns, but calligraphy was believed to reveal the character of the writer. So he's saying how you write tells a lot of who you are. Calligraphy is regarded as one of the highest forms of artistic expression in China. Make sure you have that in your notes, that calligraphy is regarded as the highest form. It's the gold medalist of artistic expression in China. The most important practitioner of this time, of the Han Dynasty, was Wang Qizhi, whose works have served as sort of the go-to models of excellence for future generations. And here we have Feng Zhu. And Feng Zhu is an example of this sort of semi-cursive style, this sort of running, is what they call it. Neither too formal, no too free, with a relaxed. It's got a pretty easygoing manner. The brushwork varies in width and length, and it kind of creates this rhythmic vitality. Individual characters remain distinct, yet within each character the strokes are connected, they're simplified as the brush moves from one to the other with just not lifting off the page. And there is a gracefulness, there is a fluidity, yet the image is dynamic and it's strong. So we've covered a lot of art so far, and it seems that we've covered more history than we have art. But it's true because of these older dynasties, and what does the art tell us about each dynasty, all the way back to the Neolithics? Can you remember the Chinese dynasty song? And you have to ask yourself, how is art how is art influenced by the philosophical ideas of, say, legalism, Confucianism, and Taoism? Writing, born to ask questions to the heavens, particularly calligraphy, is an art form, the highest of all art forms. And just one last thing before I leave you today, to remind you about Chinese history. Chinese history can be explained. Dynasties come and dynasties fall. And why? It all boils down to one thing: the mandate of heaven. Thanks for listening.